Do all the fun things.
Yay!
Let's get started. Tip of the spear: gender wars. Ask why the FBI was so upset. Asked why the FBI was so obsessed with Black revolutionary formations, such as the Black Panther Party. Daraba bin Wahad offered a psychosexual explanation. He explained that at the concrete level, black people with guns did not pose the existential threat to the highly militarized US society. However, in the white collective unconsciousness, the image of armed black men arouses the terrifying specter of black male potency. One of the things that scares white America is the thought of an assertive black manhood. He explained, they cannot deal with the threat that it represents to white male supremacy. It represents to white male supremacy. Daroba's remarks called attention to the sexual and anxieties structuring racist state repression, those involving the black male's supposed genitals and sexual superiority. And it does not matter that what Tamir Ketosa was termed the quote black fantastic. Sorry. The idea that black men are, oh my gosh, parapic, hypersexual, prone to grape, is the product of white invention. The fact that power, authority, and the capacity for violence are concentrated in the white man's hands forces the world to contend with that which might otherwise only dwell in his mind. Under capitalist modernity, white bourgeoisie, heteropatriarchal man is defined over and against other modes of gendered life. These subordinated humanism include the biologized, I can't say that word.
Biology.
You can't say it either.
Biologized.
Subordinated humanisms include the biologized category.
Yeah. Biologized category of women as well as feminine, queer, and trans socialities. Crucially, though, it also includes colonized and racially marked men. This means that blackness is historically femicized racial categories in which black males are divorced from the hegemonic masculinity. In this specific context, manhood and masculinity refer to structural location of dominance and entitlement articulated across environmental, economic, political, racial, and sexual domains. The white man's ongoing effort to maintain racial and gender dominance helps explain why the political repression of black men often take explicitly sexualized forms. Participants in the Long Attica Revolt sought to impede a structure of gendered and sexual racism that constantly assailed their humanity. In Chapter 2, I discussed the rectile examination as a mundane form of state-sanctioned rape employed to humiliate and dehumanize prisoned people. Examples of similarly violent rituals abound. For years prior to the revolt, white male prison guards in Attica and elsewhere referred to their black and brown I don't know how to say this.
Should be
Truncheons?
referred to as that. It's an item.
Let me find out what it means. We're back.
I think it means the like the stick that they carry on their person. I forgot what that's called.
Yeah, it's a stick that police uses truncheons as inward sticks. Oof. Not only did they wield the symbols of phalanic power against non-compliant, deviant, and or revolting captive bodies, They also used them to issue nonverbal commands. The captives were not seen as worthy recipients of rational speech, only as eminent objects controlled by sexualized violence. Inanimate. I can't say inanimate. I can't say it. I know what it is. One tap against the prison's concrete wall meant stop. 2 taps meant walk. 3 taps commanded silence. As a medium of communication, the inward stick demarcated the boundaries between white masculine humanity and undergendered black nothingness, between those who were men and those who were not. Capitalist social relations are entangled with these racial gender dynamics. The orderly functioning of the prison enables those who work in them to support themselves and provide for their families, and therefore to see themselves as men. When the revolt took place, the New York Department of Corrections, NYDOCS, operated 12 prisons and had an annual budget of over $100 million, most of which was paid out to employees' wages. These prisons were, and are even more so today, economic pillars of the communities and that surrounded them. Amid the deindustrializing political economy, prison towns like Attica, Dannemora, and Comstock increasingly depended on the state funds transferred of human bodies from black urban geographies to functions of commodities of industrialized punishment. Racist ideologies engendered what W.E.B. Du Bois termed the psychological wages of whiteness, preventing most whites from recognizing that the social forces responsible for the overwhelmingly black captive population were so responsible for closing their factories and mills, creating a landscape in which working in a prison was one of their few economically viable options. In many cases, multiple generations of white male guards earned their living by lording over the seemingly boundless supply of racially othered males convicted of all manners of criminalized acts, constantly reinforcing notions of inherent white male supremacy. Commonly referred to as, quote, up south, the rural regions of New York State have a long history of organized white supremacy, fascism, and militant anti-communism, all of which are entrenched within the carceral system. News that the guards of Eastern Prison in Napanoch, New York, were actively recruiting for the Ku Klux Klan made headlines in 1974, but by then, the interconnections between white supremacist organizations in the prisons were well known to captives, who regularly witnessed cross burnings and Klan rallies on prison grounds. Immediately following the massacre, family members and supporters of the rebels spoke of being harassed at state police checkpoints, while groups of full Klan regalia were allowed to pass through without incident. After the massacre, the state prison towns were awash with racist propaganda. One sign likened black people to cancer and called for them to be similarly cut from the social body. Encapsulated by their statement, quote, "We are men, we are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten and driven as such," end quote. The Attica rebels asserted a political masculinity, and in so doing repudiated the genocidal logics of bestial dehumanization. Critical interventions by black feminist scholars have subjected masculinist formulation such as this to analytical pressure, showing how the dynamism of potentially transformative movement is hampered by patriarchy and how women and gendered non-conforming people were forced to struggle against these logics, both in the broader world and in their own movements. The revolt was not untarnished by patriarchy, sexism, and homophobia. Not only do felon-centric, sexist, did I say that right?
There's no N. It's phallocentric.
Phallocentric, sexist, and homophobic discourse later the archives litter the archives the rebels left behind, but many of them had committed acts of gender violence against each other and those in their communities, and it is crucial that this dynamic be named and condemned for the harm that it caused. At the same time, their declaration of manhood is more complex than it may initially appear. First, it must be understood within the context of the collective subordination of these men within a historical structure of incarceral gender violence and destabilized conventional notions of their gendered positionality. Moreover, as I showed in the preceding chapters, the practice they enacted under the rubric of manhood involved emergent forms of inner mutations, intimacy, sensuality, care, queerness, collectivity, and interdependency that defy hegemonic norms. When viewed through this frame, it becomes clear that as a totality, the revolt was not an attempt to appropriate the trappings of white patriarchal power to obtain party with white men or to become men at the expense of others' autonomy and or dignity. It was an effort to chart a new course of what a revolutionary manhood or humanhood as one survivors termed it, could become. The Attica massacre violently disrupted this emergent project. In fact, it sought unsuccessfully, I might add, to eradicate this very idea. Unwilling or unable to comprehend the significance of this gender insurgency, state enforcers experienced a long Attica revolt as a violent threat to their manhood. While the rebels were still in control of D Yard, Executive Deputy Commissioner Walton Dunbar told his subordinates that, quote, he saw an inmate take a sharp instrument, cut out a hostage reproductive organs, and take the young man's organs and stuff them in his mouth, end quote. After the massacre, when 10 prison guards lay dead or dying, Dunbar and his cronies told the press that the rebels had slit their throats. The New York Times reported the rebels emasculated a hostage, editorializing that their conduct reflected a barbarism wholly alien to civilized society. These claims, which also found their way into FBI surveillance reports, were readily accepted because of their compatibility with deeply ingrained ideas about black male S-words and sexual degeneracies. Moreover, they legitimated the existing social order, demonstrating the importance of containing this civilizational threat by all available means. The problem, however, was that the rebels did not slash the guards' throats and castrate no one. I refrain from calling this counterfactual a lie, since it exposes a disavowed truth. In the symbolic universe of patriarchal white domination, black rebels did not simply seize a prison, capture hostages, and assert demands. They murdered, mutilated, and sexually violated white men, exposed his political and sexual impotence, and forced him to auto-cannibalize the ultimate symbols of his masculine identity. A masculinity contest, a gender war, lay at the heart of their efforts to keep prison under control, and it was a zero-sum game. One side won by making the other side lose. The winner accumulated masculinity as a finite and privatized resource, while the losers was literally a figuratively unmaimed. The sexualized history of white racial terrorism in the United States, suggests that through this castration fable, state actors were projecting their disavowed anxieties and fantasies into the rebels. The fetishizistic dispossession, appropriation, and consumption of black male genitalia is a vaunted ritual of white sociality. Fanon writes that although his unconscious mind is saturated with quote, the most immoral instincts and unmentionable desires, end quote, the white man attempts to repudiate his irrationality by transferring his desires to black males and labeling them the embodiment of evil. It can hardly be considered coincidental that the person Dunbar accused of committing this atrocity was the rebellion's head of security. At dark, a physically imposing man named Frank Big Black Smith, Fanon continues. Still, on the genital level, isn't the white man who hates black people promoted by a feeling of impotence or sexual inferiority? Since virility is taken to be the absolute ideal, doesn't he have a feeling of inadequacy in relations to the black man who is viewed as a penis symbol? Isn't lynching the black man a sexual revenge? We know how sexualized torture, abuse, and ill treatment can be. Let us now return to the Attica massacre and look squarely at this sexual revenge. For it is in this reflection of violence that we can see a key source from which man derives his identity, power, and coherence. All this is all a N-word is good for. Even you quote, you ever seen that picture in the Black Book of Omaha, Nebraska from 1919 when they lynched a black person? I'm not going to say the B word. The question caught me by surprise. Bugs and I had been discussing this, quote, exit interview with Attica Deputy Warden Carl Pfeil, I don't know, which occurred a week after the massacre. Although he hadn't been told, Bugs knew then that he did well on the interview. He would be transferred, but if he failed, he would remain in Attica to be tortured. When asked the pivotal question, quote, what did you do in the yard, end quote, Bugs told the truth, but nothing more. Quote, I survived, end quote. I can't say it. Pfeil, can't say it. P-F-I-E-E-I-L, sorry. P-F-P-A-F-I-E-I-L, I did that backwards. Accepted this answer and approved Bugs' transfer to Comstock, a maximum security prison near the Adirondack Mountains, promising that if he found out Bugs was more involved than he was letting on, he would be brought back to Attica to suffer the same fate as those deemed militants. It was at this point in his story that he asked me about the lynching picture. I immediately recalled the archival footage of Queen Mother Moore's invocation of lynching during her 1973 speech in Greenhaven Prison. I have seen the photos. It depicts William Brown's lifeless body on top a smoldering pyre.
Pyre.
Pyre is it's a way you build a fire. It's something to burn.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Flames engulfed his mutilated head like a terrible halo. His seared flesh is the color of charcoal. The police had arrested him, but a mob kidnapped him from The kidnappers stripped him naked, hung him from the lamppost, and filled his already lifeless body with bullets. They then they tied his remains to the back of a police car and dragged him to a major downtown intersection. This is a trigger warning. I should have did this earlier. They placed him on a pile of wood, doused him with lamp oil, and set it aflame, cooking his flesh to a crisp. Then they tied the desecrated body to the back of a car for the second time and paraded it through the streets of downtown Omaha. Pieces of the nose and probably pieces of his flesh were taken as souvenirs. Upward to 20,000 people witnessed the spectacle. His corpse was eventually buried in a grave that remained unmarked until 2019. The image is not something one forgets. Dozens of white men are standing shoulder to shoulder around Brown's scorched form. They are respectably dressed, in suits, ties, overcoats, and sports caps. A child peers curiously over the shoulders of the men in front of the row. Some of them are smiling. Bug continued, Well, imagine on the town hall lawn that picture is being blown up to the church window size of the caption under it says, quote, "This is all a N-word is good for," end quote. Not as I am getting on this correction department bus, I am shackled and everything, and I stop and I hesitate and I look at the picture. I'm confused by what I am hearing. Was Bugs telling me that a lynching occurred in the town square in Attica, New York in 1971? Was he asking me to conjure the horror and spectacles of Brown's lynching so that I would have a frame of reference to understand what happened to him and the others? Was he explaining that the response to Attica was performed in a manner of specially designed to communicate that black people had value only as objects of degradation? His instructions that I imagine the photograph suggests that he was making some kind of figurative analogy. Here's the quote, end quote. And where was this picture? I asked, trying to clarify. It is on the town hall lawn. I repeated back what he is telling me. They had a blown up image of a black man being lynched and burned on the town hall. His charred body was laying there. He had been lynched and set afire. Yes, and the body was like black charcoal. There was all of those townspeople. They had been observers of it, I was too disorientated by the way in which his narrative defied the linear temporality. I can't say it. Temporality. Why am I having a hard time with simple words? What was it?
You nailed it. Temporality.
Temporality. How it ruptured in any notion of progressive teleology to fully comprehend what Bugs was telling me. We're going to look up that word. What is teleology? Come on. There we go. We're going to look at that word. It's teleology. Effects. Is it there? There you go. Teleology. Come on. Okay. A philosophical study of purpose, goal, orientatedness, or final cause suggests that objects, actions, and natural processes exist for the specific inherent purpose rather than merely a chance or mechanical cause. That's what they're telling us. So what are we getting from this?
I'm getting that they have a false view of history, and what they end up thinking uh, is that um, it's all moving and progressing towards something better, but the image shows otherwise.
Thank you. Teleology. To fully comprehend what Bugs was telling me. It was August of 2020. People across the United States and beyond were in the streets rebelling against state-endorsed white supremacy, terror. 3 months earlier, George Floyd, a black man from Minneapolis, had been murdered by a white cop who nailed on his neck for over 8 minutes. His fellow officers stood idly by as George cried out, "I can't breathe." Several times, Eric Gardner had cried the same words when the NYPD officers choked him to death in 2014. Both were spectacles of ritual violence that were video recorded, circulated on social media, and consumed millions of times. The public outcry did nothing to stem the tide of killings of black men and women by police and other racist vigilantes. In between and since these events, I couldn't help but think of this as I was talking with Bugs about the white supremacist terror he experienced in Attica 50 years earlier. He was answering my questions by invoking an act of white supremacist terror that occurred 50 years before that. I had completely lost track of time, but for me, created a profound cognitive dissonance was for Bugs a durable historical artifact. Quote, "If I live to be 100, I'll never forget that scene that's indelibly stamped in my mind." Bugs was explaining that he was waiting for to be spent upriver in a line of shackled black men. He saw that the physical reproduction of this infamous photo had been magnified and displayed in the town square. Beneath it, someone had written, quote, "This is all the N-words is good for." White folks in the town of Attica understood the massacre through the moral and libidinal. Is that right?
Libidinal.
What
It's
is it?
libidinal.
Libidinal?
Yeah, libidinal.
What's that mean?
It has something to do with the body. Like libido.
Okay.
So
Find out which
if I
part.
remember right, it has something to do with like sexual stuff.
It means like driven by libido. Libidinal. Driven by libido. Okay. Libidinal economy of lynching. And we're empowered enough in this understanding to allow this grotesque collaboration of anti-blackness to be displayed in the center of their community, just as other white people had done with William Brown's corpse and with George Floyd, Eric Gardner, and Michael Brown. Ad infinitum.
Ad infinitum. It means to go on forever.
Okay, ad infinitum. Although generally associated with the Billie Holiday hauntingly vocalized as, quote, "Southern trees bearing strange fruit," historian Manning Marble explains that, quote, "the form of lynching assumes hanging by the neck, shooting, castration, burning at the stake, or other spontaneous and random forms of violence, as secondary to the actual terror it invokes among the black masses. Lynching is an American ritual of racial terrorism and spectatorship that emerged as a dominant expression of patriarchal white supremacy following chattel slavery's formal Abolition, authored more than a century ago. Ida B. Wells' analysis of lynching anticipates Fanon's conception of sexual revenge, challenging the dominant narrative that lynchings responded to a figure of the male black rapists. Wells argued that through this form of terror, the white man sought to affirm and repair his masculinity, self-conception, a self-conception that was imperiled by the specter of black political, economic, and cultural advancement. It goes to prove that our superiority complex is really rooted in inferior and insecurities. It is. It's rooted in our insecurities and like wanting to dominate. Yeah. Literary theorist, oh my gosh, Aleya I. Abador Roman argues that lynching is a form of gang rape. Quote, a profound expression of communal sexual perversion, especially one in which the victim is grotesquely violated for the sexualized psychosocial satisfaction of the whole host of participants and spectators, end quote. This analytic applies to how the state restores order following rebellions in the New York City jails, Auburn, Attica, and elsewhere. Upon regaining physical control, state actors immediately denuded and sexually violated the rebels. Commonly used in situations of war across cultures and historical contexts, the official rationale for stripping the enemy is to ensure that they cannot smuggle contraband in clothing or bodily orifices. Unofficially, however, enforced nudity is a mundane form of sexual violence, a means of public humiliating the vanquished, of putting their defeated bodies on display, and of enhancing their vulnerability to other forms of abuse. Survivors of the Breach Queen and Kew Gardens rebellions disclosed the sexualized nature of their dehumanization. Quote, they herded us like animals and forced us to lie on top of each other, while guards made cruel and racist remarks like, quote, put that D in him, N-word. Prisoners who refused to lay on the other men were beaten mercilessly, reported BPP veteran Albert Woodfox. Several men were commanded to bend over and spread their buttocks, only to be prodded and kicked in the rear. Others were told to, quote, try effing each other. I want your D in the man's A in front of you, quote, end quote, or promised that if they could maintain their erection, they could be spared further beatings. Through these inflictions of sexual torture, objectification, and violent homoeroticism, the guards sought to expel their captives from the domain of masculine humanity while asserting themselves as dominant white men. Similar rituals were performed in prisons, where no major rebellions occurred. Panther Ricardo Delone reported that 2 days after the state siege of Attica, DOCS executed a series of anti-racial raids against politicized prisoners in Clinton. Captives maintained that prison guards and some of the same state troopers responsible for bloodshed in D-Yard once only subjected them to gassing, macing, beating, strip searching, rectal examinations, and other forms of sexualized humiliation. One of the victims described how, quote, a dozen of so guards set upon me, a literally ripped the clothes from my body until I laid naked on the floor. He further explained that as they, quote, released their tensions on us, through physical violence, they forced the prisoners to kiss their feet and call themselves N-words. Others were told to drop their hands and knees, bark like a dog, and pronounce themselves punks. Prison sexual vernacular for men who are anally penetrated, during homosexual sex. These practices are employed in one captive's words, quote, to strip the black man of his pride, and to make it so that, quote, he conforms to the tastes of his oppressors, a formulation that invokes and often discloses white fetish for the figurative and literal consumption of black flesh. A prisoner's rights lawyers later told Congress that despite a virtual media blackout, Min and Clinton endured, quote, a truly vicious amount of brutalization until at least April of 1972, revealing the temporality of geography of the massacre to be much broader than has been previously understood. This brutalization sought to actively produce new gender and racial formations. An Auburn and Attica survivor explains that while torturing these captives, guards were, quote, calling the people N-words, calling brothers white N-words, Spanish N-words, black N-words. Everybody is an N-word who had taken part in the rebellion. The capacious use of this phrase, coupled with inflections against people of all hues, illuminates the fundamental anti-blackness of the incarceral state formation, at the same time that it shows how this violence aimed to produce a social order that had been racially destabilized. By classifying all these rebelled N-words, the assault force legitimized the exposure of phenotypically white bodies for the forms of debasement for which black people are automatically eligible. This violence was not only aimed at killing, controlling, or debasing, quote, N-words, but at producing them. And perhaps most importantly, it sought to purify, and reconstruct the transgressions, borders of white men, to restore it as a privileged category of social being, through one on which white skin alone was now inefficient. As a lynching party and gang rape, the Attica massacre unleashed the sexual charge that simmers just beneath the surface of incarceral domination. The survivors recalled a frenzied state trooper running amid the denuded black forms, yelling, quote, find the big N-words and get their nuts, end quote. Big Black, who was accused of castrating a guard, was captured, stripped of his clothing, and forced to lay spread-eagled on a picnic table, while his assailants I can't say it. Variously, cursed him, spit on him, burning his bodies with cigarettes, and subjecting him to Russian roulette. He remained on the table for hours, during which the guards repeatedly attacked his genitals and threatened to castrate him with a bladed weapons. Other victims were anally great, with a variety of foreign objects, including, quote, N-word sticks, gun barrels, and broken bottles, and a screwdriver. Jesus Christ. These rituals of sexual terror went on for days, even after it became known that neither Big Black nor anyone else had castrated a hostage. Attica official body count reflects but a fraction of the casualties suffered and loss of massacre produced, but only for those who experience it directly, but also for their loved ones. Survivors suffered a range of physiological, and psychological harm, including amputations, mallesions, fractures, scarring, chronic pain, arthritis, loss of mobility, spinal disorder, hypertension, seizures, cold sweats, recurring nightmares, migraines, out of control rage, fatigue, fevers, flashback, swelling, paranoia, hallucinations, speech impediment, insomnia, depression, dizziness, auditory and visual impairment, blackouts, bone disorders, nose bleeding, memory loss, numbness, difficulty around crowds, fear of raincoats, prisons, police, and helicopters, difficulty trusting others, survivor guilt, suicidal ideation, self-mutilation, hostilities towards symbols of authority, and hatred of police. Several survivors of the massacre later died of drug overdose, cirrhosis of the liver, and alcohol poisoning resulting from chemical dependency developed after the massacre. Caspar Baker Gary, who I discussed in detail below, was one of the many whose lives were shortened by mundane acts of cruelty. In 1993, as his body slowly gave way to kidney failure, he confided to his friend that his illness emerged because Attica guards had incessantly kicked him in the back while he was trapped in solitary confinement. The massacre's genocidal violence produced what anthropologist Christine A. Smith calls, oh my gosh, sequelae, right?
I don't know.
We're going to look at that word. I think it's sequelae. Sequelae. Let me just find out.
Sequelae is my guess.
Let me say it, but hold on. I think I have it though. Of course not. There you go.
No.
Oh, soliloquy?
No. That's not soliloquy. Sequela.
Well, that's it. That's it. Is it's just a
Sequelae.
huge. Yeah. All right. They basically fucked all of them up so bad that it's almost beyond repairable recognition in a sense. They need, yeah. The gendered, reverberating, deadly effects of state terror that inflicted and affected communities of the dead. Mary Pope, whose husband died of a drug overdose in 1987, revealed that after Attica, he, quote, could not bear to be touched by others, end quote. Lana Dave Anderson testified that following the massacre, she watched her husband slowly, quote, slip away. Jonah Williams' husband became, quote, extremely impatient, aggressive, and fearful, and had difficulty holding jobs. Nora Northrup reported that her husband was, quote, never the same man after what he went through in Attica during the retaking. Charlene Miller testified that after Attica, her father pulled away from his family, began drinking heavily, and that, quote, a light went out in him that never returned. She testified that her dad told her that he felt like a veteran of war, and that, quote, his manhood was taken away from him due to beatings him received in his groin area, which prevented him from performing sexually. George Budd Jr. testified that his brother, a survivor of Attica, committed self-unaliving on the 3-year anniversary of the massacre. In February of 1995, David Galloway, another Attica survivor, hung himself. Nicholas Morales spoke of living death, testified, quote, it killed me that day. Deputy Warden PFEIL, who presided over much of this terror, even discovered that Bugs had done much more than survive during the rebellion. He never learned that during this chaotic opening moment, Bug was impoverished in makeshift bomb that leveled the prison chapel. Huh?
Improvised.
What? Thank you, improvised. Sorry. Bugs told me that after passing his exit interview, as he filed into the bus bound to Comstock, and saw a sneering white faces looming over William Brown's corpse staring back at him. He turned to take one last look at Attica Prison, capturing a mental image that still brings him a small measures of delight. Quote, the chapel was still on fire, and thick black smoke was still coming from the top. This is a week later, man. They hadn't been able to put the fire out. Laughs. Might still be on fire up there, as far as I know, 50 years later, you dig? A beautiful operation. That was heavy. That was messed up. God. Anybody have anything to say before we move on to the next part? Want to process this part a little bit more? What?
May they all rest in peace that are no longer with us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say.
All right. Sounds good. All right. During the recorded phone conversation held just hours after the massacre, Nelson Rockefeller imitated to what is it? Why am I having hard times with simple word? What?
Intimated
to President Nixon that the assault was, quote, really a beautiful operation. The governor's description of this macabre spectacle of black death and mutilation was, quote, beautiful, suggests that its visualization was circulated and consumed within the broader economies of white culture. Having analyzed the sexualized practice of the massacre as lynching, I now turn to the photographic and representational practices developed to memorialize and communicate its white supremacist aesthetic to broader audiences. As with the physical violence itself, these visual practices were as much about dehumanizing and undergendering black men as they were about producing white masculine selfhood. As Maurice O. Wallace explains, through popular photographic practices, black men come to embody the inverse picture necessary for the positive self-portrait of white identity. As violence of representation is exemplified by the covered image of the official report of the New York State Special Commission on Attica, published by Bantam Books on the 1-year anniversary of the massacre. It depicts what can aptly be described as a 20th century slave coffin. Kofli? What is that? That's a new word. Hold on. Coffle. And it means, hopefully it did it. Of course it didn't. I have to add it. What the heck? To add it. Come on, add it. Okay, here it is. A line or a group of enslaved people, prisoners, or animals chained together and driven together, historically used to transport during domestic slaves. All right, so now we know what that means. Okay. Publishing, of coffee. A lone state trooper, clad in a bright orange raincoat, helmet, pants, and boots, stands with his feet shoulders width apart, clutching a long, quote, inward stick, which hangs below his knees. He is surrounded by a sea of inwardized bodies. Oh my gosh. Most, but not all of which are brown. The bodies are arranged in what appears to be several columns, but which is in fact a single massive serpentine line that extends across Attica's yard. The figures are standing upright, with their hands on top of their heads. They are completely nude, and their genitals and buttocks exposed. This as a semiotic vehicle in the pre-internet era. The cover of the book conveyed white masculine supremacy and black non-being as common sense, and did so under the insidious guise of an objective white liberal humanism. Jesus Christ. Clearly shaped by a visual imagery of white supremacy in which white man exists over and above his quote unquote primitive wards and the taboo. Is it taboo? Taboo? I can't say. Oh my gosh, why do you use your, what's the word?
Tableau.
Tableau provided publics beyond the walls with the, oh my gosh, the titillating glimpse. I don't know how to say this word. Look this word up.
It's titillating.
Yep, titillating glimpse of the spoils of domestic war. It invited them to identify not with the denuded disgrace and the enrised figures of in the, oh my gosh, the kofli? What's that word?
The same word from earlier, it's a kafel.
Okay. But with the generic standing for legitimizing white/state power, authority, and domination. The uniformed man with a big stick standing in the center of the frame. The massacre was under intense visual surveillance. The FBI reportedly obtained 583 black and white photographs, 4,000 millimeter color, 4,600,
464.
464 35 millimeter color slides, 331 color photographs, and 6 videotapes captured during the massacre and its aftermath by the New York State Police and Maron County Sheriff's Office in the Niagara Falls Police Department, among other agencies. Additionally, at least one member of the National Guard took it upon himself to photograph the event as a private citizen. He then sold some of his photos to the press. Existing discussions have heretofore focused on the degree to which this visual record, which was generously pruned, cropped, and otherwise edited before it was turned over, was useful for identifying assailants for criminal and civil litigation. Although critical, this focus on authorized self-use values obscure and convert ways in which visual representations of anti-black violence circulate as ubiquitous technologies of white subject formation, as sources of covert employment, and as a, oh my gosh, semiotic stabilizer of white civilization. Jesus. Both initiating the slaughter and the documentarians were instructed to capture situations of opportunity, quote unquote. In other words, the men with cameras were afforded the same latitude and creative lenses as the men with guns. In his testimony before the McKay Commission, an Attica survivor named Francis J. Hune briefly discussed the use of photographic equipment As the vanquished rebels were being abused, Hune witnessed a trooper yelling, quote, get that, redacted, of course, and then fire his rifle from the catwalk down into the yard at an indiscernible target, which we can safely assume was a person. He then saw the photographer run towards that very spot in order to shoot with the camera, that which had already been shot with a gun. For Hune, who was white and apparently unsympathetic towards the rebellion, the event was, quote, scary, but also reassuring to me because they had time to take pictures. They didn't feel they had to be on the defensive. The massacre was a space-time of luxury and indiscretion, where a violent mob had occasion to experiment and indulge their delayed longings. The photos served as tactical functions, and yet Hune suspected that these acts were not entirely random, that they were partially choreographed. He recalls that, quote, civilian-dressed people were positioned on the catwalks, and that they seemed to be, quote, directing things a bit. A beautiful operation was a cinema verite of terror. Officially, state actors recorded the operation for archival and training purposes on a non-explanation that says little about what they hoped to learn from the visual records and how they understood its values as an archive. Much of the available footage was captured by a New York State police sergeant. It is notable that for its obscured and degraded quality, as well as its incompleteness. Interestingly, the troopers narrates what he. I gotta do this. I have a picture I have to do. Thank you. What he is recording, allowing viewers to experience the uncoding of the dominant narrative as the actual events are unfolding. At one point, he points the camera at a tunnel and using proto-genocidal language, remarks that captives were constantly scurrying between different sections of the prisons like rats. Experimenting with different forms of visualization, Smith shot some of his video through the scope mounted on his rifle. The reptile pan back. Is that right? I can't say this word. I have to look this word up.
Radical.
Not radical.
Said reticle.
Reticle, yeah. Fine lines and dots. So, yeah. Pans back and forth across the yard, putting viewers in the position of sharpshooters, a preview of what was to come. At another point, he zeroes in on a revolting black man, referring to him as the ugliest, blackest inward gentleman I've ever seen in my life. These guys suck. At which point laughter had been heard in the room, indicating that Saidiya Hartman calls, quote, the complicated nexus of terror and enjoyment. When asked why he was showing the footage to the cadets at the police academy, John C. Miller, former chief inspector of the New York State Police, admitted that it was not being used to derive lessons from the assault. He testified that you view something to possibly learn something, but sometimes it's something that you see that you have done, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to improve things or it's going to be changed. This suggests that there was no tactical or strategic reasons to show these videos to oncoming cadets, and that perhaps the footage was screening simply so that they could see what they had done, to appreciate it from the aesthetic point of view. It was to train the cadets, that is, to help them develop habits through and or behaviors in forms of engagement that didn't necessarily have to be improved or changed. But what of the massacre's unseen redacted and deleted visual archives. We can confidently speculate, as several scholars have noted, photographs were central to the ritual of lynching, and their primary functions is not to further terrorize the victims. Rather, through lynching, photos, white subjects construct their collective identity and group solidarity upon the substrate of black subjection. As keepsakes, lynching photographs become an instrument for manipulating time, enabling predators to prolong the ecstatic, fleeting moment of total power lynching ritual allows. Through photograph, David Marriott explains, quote, an image of white identity emerges from a spectacle of annihilation. The lynchers posing grimly alongside their black trophies. A moment frozen in time, flashlit in the heat of the subsidized passion, having performed their human sacrifice in the most excessive way possible. The mob stages photographic encounters in which they took at the camera, not with expression of horror, but with countenances of claim satisfaction, whiteness reborn again and again. Later, amid the prosaic flow of daily moment through the photograph, they show the images of their family and friends who seen them standing next to a thing that is clearly not alive, not human, and against this negative, a narrative of their own vitality, dominance, and belongingness to the community of men is drawn in sharp relief. It is entirely predictable that this is what the unseen Attica photos contained. And if more evidence is required, perhaps that which it has not been called from a potentially, what the heck does that mean? Bygone era. Let's go look up his word. It's putatively, can't say the word, bygone era. We need look no further than the U.S. torture camp, Abu Ghraib. Not only did the cache of image obtained by the press in 2004 reveal that Muslim men constructed as terrorists and enemy combatants were being subjected to violence of sexual racism, but also that U.S. soldiers and prison guards, both male and female, took pleasure in being photographed while inhabiting postures of dominance over these men. Visualizations of this violence produces the myth of white men as the rightful master of the world, covertly undergirding white patriarchy and modern state form of U.S. empire. During our conversation, Bugs shared a recollection that is also a theorization of an entanglement between violence and visuality, punishment and pleasure, anti-black terror and white sexuality. While standing in the Kofli, he explains, the guards were celebrant, talking about, did you get a N-word? Yeah, I got 5. And you know they were slapping 5s. They was even taking home movies with us, as they paraded us around. They got all kinds of cat calls about the genitals. Yeah, N-word, pick up your third leg. Okay. You know, all that kind of shit. I guess they showed them at home for their wives. You know, they have their cocktail parties and they pull out the home movies of the Attica massacre, and it was a big sport for them. Hate them bastards. The reconquest of Attica was, quote, parade, a sport, a contest to see who among the mob could most completely obliterate, dominate, and possess the black male form. The lens like the gun and the inward sticks, was simultaneously an instrument of violence and a tool for sexualized play. The wielders of these weapons were not only securing the prison and producing evidence for official state functions, they were producing, quote, home movies intended for circulation and consumptions within sacred spaces of white sociality, cocktail parties, where such novelties might simulate jealousy among those who were not there, but wishes they were, or the bedroom, where the passions of innerized bodies and third legs, quote unquote, fueled unspoken white sexual appetites. 50 years later, recalling these desires to possess and consume black flesh, Bugs articulated a deep-seated hatred that still seethes within. James Baldwin has much to say about the sexual charge of white ritual violence. He narrates his short story, quote, Going to Meet the Man, end quote, from the perspective of Jesse, a white deputy sheriff in a small southern town who sees himself as a, quote, good man. The story opens with Jesse unable to achieve an erection while trying to have sex with his wife. Frustrated, he lies beside her in bed, plumbing the depths of his mind until he arrives at a memory of himself torturing a prisoned black man, a civil rights ringleader, a bad N-word, who shocked the man's testicles with a cattle prod. The memory caused Jesse to hurt all over with a peculiar excitement which refused to be released. He then probes deeper into his subconsciousness, recalling how he was ushered into white manhood under the tillage of his father and his father's friends who, quote, had been responsible for law and order much longer than him. As a child sitting on his father's shoulders amid a sea of white faces, he witnessed his first lynching. He saw a black man being burned alive and castrated, and he watched that sea of white faces, including that of his mother, also watching it and being titillated. Quote, he watched the hanging, gleaming body, a most beautiful and terrible object he had ever seen till then. He remembered how they severed the object's large black penis, and the memory causes Jesse, nature to return to him again. Fully aroused, Jesse embraces his wife and tells her to, quote, love me just like you'd love a N-word. They engage in passionate sex. Similarly, in If Veiled Streets Could Talk, a novel that revolves around the Manhattan House of Detention, but which is believed to be loosely based in Attica. A male character who was recently released from prison tells his friend that not only was he raped, but that guards derived sexual gratifications from his suffering. Quote, I don't believe there's a white man in this country, baby, who can get his D hard without hearing some inward moan. Baldwin writes, through fiction, Baldwin theorizes how white identity, intimacy, desire, and sexuality are constituted through black suffering. The insidiousness of the McKay Commission report, with its cover image of denuded and innerized males, is that it masks while surreptitiously perpetuating violence against the Attica survivors. However, it does not do so alone. The report was nominated for a Black a National Book Award in 1972 and received near universal praise of its thoroughness, even-handedness, and courage in criticizing the excess of the state. Its pages are filled with salacious descriptions of homosexual behavior, of captive men, consensual sex, as well as rape. However, nowhere does it analyze the profoundly sexualized techniques of incarceral management or various sexual predations enacted upon Attica's captives to restore normative order. And yet, the Colthi image on the cover of the book visually reifies the captive status of chattel, presenting their vulnerability to sexual violence as a banal social fact. Among myriad available images, the marketing team at Bantam Books chose to adorn the covering with this grotesque image of sexualized black subjection. Moreover, until now, no one seems to have thought this atrocity was worthy of remark, as I have been able to find any evidence that any critics discussed the use of this image on the cover. What I did find was that an article in the September 17th, 1972 edition of the New York Times announcing the release of the report. It prominently features a version of the same photography, but with a significant modification. The men's penises have been removed. As I have already shown, the beautiful operation, quote unquote, entailed orgastic rituals of sexual domination during which anxieties about black male genitalia and discourse of castration loomed large. The New York Times never printed a formal retraction of their false claims that the rebels had castrated a hostage, nor did the newspaper of record renounce the white supremacist theory of ontology that authorized the claim in the first place. The notion that white men enjoys a natural and exclusive entitlement to masculine humanity is not so clearly stated in their write-up of the McKay Commission report a year later, but it embedded within the discourse the article's accompanying image. The staff of the Times found this image so irresistible that they circumvented publication standards prohibiting the display of frontal nudity by pictorially castrating at least 3 black men located in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame. The denuded profiles of these men are clearly visible, but in the space where their penises were noticeable in other versions of the image, only a void remains. One can only speculate about whether Attica rebel Jomo Omuwale was aware of this alteration when he wrote in 1973, "We must not accept any more medium-made castrated leaders who quietly retreat when it's time to stand," accompanied by the invocative headline, "Autonomy of the Prison Riot." The image provides a paper's global readership with a sexualized visualization of racial mastery, while at the same time providing the comforting assurance that the the phantasmagoric, what is that? Phantasmagoric black dick, was not there. And moreover, that it was rightfully possessed by a higher authority. This absence was also a presence, one that visually communicated the simultaneous military defeat of sexual disarmament of black males insurgents. It displayed the availability of black flesh as an engendered terrain of, libidinal experimentation. It bears stating, although I hope this at this point is obvious that my, oh my gosh, symptomatic reading of this image is not an endorsement of an underlining logic of its deployment, a logic that epitests unique agency of cisgendered men with penises, rather an implicit, oh my gosh, implicit, I can't say this word, implicitating, explicating, sorry, an intensely patriarchal logic of white supremacy in which there can be no masculinity except for that which belongs to white men. This is the same white supremacist logic that relentlessly assails black revolutionary possibility. However imperfect and shackled by patriarchy it may be. In fact, the Times accompanied this excisions of rebel bodies with excisions of their politics. The central finding of the report, according to the article, was that, in contrast to claims made by state actors, which Nelson Rockefeller and Russell G. Oswald, the rebellion was reformist rather than revolutionary in its orientation. This shows that it was the elite liberal media and not the right-wing lynch mob that realized the fantasies of the rebellion's most adherent antagonists. Although through autonomy of prison riots, the newspaper simultaneously negated black revolutionary politics and obliterated the black penis. Hold on a second. This is a lot. I think. Let me look ahead. Can you remember 149?
Sure, since that's the page we're on.
Yeah. Looking. It's got like 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, yeah, the next one is around 149. Yeah, 161. So this might be a good stopping point. I know it's a little early, but it's better than trying to find a stopping point. Would you agree?
Sounds good.
Plus, this is intense.
Mm-hmm.
This is intense.
Very intense.
Very.
Wait, 149. Oh yeah, the petition to. Okay, good. All right, let me go on mute. Let me do one thing before you start talking. Let me do one thing. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're down low, that's what. Okay, good. All right, let's go ahead and let's start the conversation. Who wants to go first?
I just wanted to say that it shows a very big intersection of racism and sexism within this chapter, and how within the system of sexism it's also used those logics within race.
Yeah. It's used to also make black people, especially black men, not men. And it brings them down to a property level and actually a childish, as looked upon as a child. And it also dictates that masculinity in a racist society, white supremacist society, belongs to the white man, who gets to depict what masculinity looks like, and it gets to take down anything that seems to challenge the masculinity of white people.
I don't.
Did I get that wrong? Anybody?
No, you were right. I don't really have anything to say. This chapter was a little heavy for me to be talking.
It was very heavy, but what they did is the people that went in there and did the massacre, their manhoods were threatened by their revolutionary spirits and by them taking control of their life in the prison So in a sense, they were emasculated by that. So they had to return it by doing worse things and destroying them, and bringing them down to the very depths of what they talk about in this book, the depths of not being a human, being dehumanized and stuff. So yeah, so the patriarchy belongs to the masculinity part belongs to the white people, and that's one of the reasons why whiteness needs to be eradicated. The concept of, for TikTok purposes only, the construct of whiteness. There you go. Anybody have any pushback?
No.
All right. Anything else you want to add more? Anybody want to add more? Okay. All right. And I'll give it a few minutes. If someone wants to come up from the chat, you don't have to. It's not a requirement. Give it a few minutes. Oh my gosh, this long word. Okay, 149. We're on 149. And you know what? I think it doesn't matter if we go to the full hour. I think what it is it's just a good stopping point. It's very heavy-handed. Next will be the petition for the certificates of extraordinary. That's all it says. So looks like we're getting away from this heavy sexualized and heavy taking away people's autonomy. Big time. Even if there are prisoners, they're still taking away their autonomy. This is one of the biggest reasons why the abolition of prisons need to happen. This is why we want to abolish prisons, because it's not there to like actually do this job. It's only there to incarcerate people that seem unfit for society, mostly. I'm not saying that everybody in there didn't do something wrong. What I'm saying is how we go about it and how we do it is incorrect completely. There's no integrations. There's no restorative justice. There's no what is it called? Rehabilitation. Go ahead.
It's not designed to
Nope.
it's not designed to actually fix anything. It's just designed to enhance the problem. And I saw that Joe did.
Yep. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna agree.
All right then. Enjoying this book. More to come tomorrow. All right. If that's all, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody go. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you interacting and having the conversation. It was a heavy part. Thank you.